Hello and welcome back from the networking break. This is Tom Bechtold, of course, your host from SecureWorld Digital. Up next, we're going to be talking about proactive data security for financial services. Of course, why we're all here today, right? So we're going to learn from Mr. Eric Avigdor. He's the CPO over at Votiro. Votiro is one of our gold sponsors for the event today. They've got a cool resource center set up in the booth area. You're going to want to check that stuff out. Eric has some great stuff he's probably going to be alluding to, and they've got good resources back in that resource center for you to check out. So be sure to pop in there after the presentation. I'll remind you later, but be sure to pop into their booth and check it out. Good, like I said, good stuff in there. You'll learn a lot more and good educational content as well. So that being said, Eric is going to tell us a bit about the threat landscape that you're all facing right now in financial services and give us some good actionable takeaways at the end. So stay tuned. Eric, it's great to have you, sir. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom, and it's awesome to be here. I'm always excited when I talk about data security. I know it sounds geeky, but I love it because it's interesting. It can be viewed from so many different angles, and financial services are definitely a sector where data security and cybersecurity are critical for many different reasons. So let's get going, and I'm hoping to keep you all up and engaged and interested as I am. So what we are going to do is we're going to talk about a few things. First, the threat landscape, the security landscape, how different types of attacks and attack vectors manifest in order to first understand how we can prevent them. Then we'll look at specifics in the financial services industry. And then we'll talk a little bit about legacy ways of mitigating these threats and new ways, newer, more modern ways of preventing these threats in the first place. Because if we think about it, and this is going to be a recurring theme throughout the session, it is better to prevent a problem than to deal with it after things are messy. I know that sounds obvious. It is not how the cybersecurity landscape has been dealing with things for many, many years. And we'll talk about Votiro a little bit, which is where I build products. Proud to say that we've been building some awesome products in this space, and we'll talk about those as well. So let's start by looking at kind of the state of the industry. Where are financial institutions? Where have they been in the past year with cyber threats? And I really want to look at this from the three most important attack vectors, attack types that put financial organizations at risk. And the three are malware, ransomware-based attacks. That's number one. Number two is insider threat. Insider employees who are mistakenly or intentionally oversharing information. And the third one is third-party risk. High-level IT security projects, but every single one of these projects is a significant attack vector and significant threat surface where we need to put in place some controls in order to ensure that we prevent the breach in the first place. So back in June, Evolve Bank out of Arkansas confirmed a cyber attack that was initiated by a piece of malware that was deployed simply because one of the employees mistakenly clicked on a malicious link. So you receive an email, it looks legitimate. In some cases, maybe you're not super focused, and that link seems like something that you need to click on to do your job. You click on it, and you know what? The next thing you know, there's malware, ransomware deployed on your endpoint. At that point in time, you're not even aware of it. And that malware starts moving laterally within the organization, gaining more and more access, eventually getting higher privilege access into important IT resources, data stores, and would then either steal information, exfiltrate it, or would encrypt it. That's exactly what happened to Evolve. Threat actors called Lockbit deployed malware. It was a ransomware attack, as well as data exfiltrated, customers' data being exfiltrated. A second case, or maybe multitude of cases, This is something that came out only 2 months ago. And there were several cases, two of which were the Toronto Dominion Bank and the Navy Federal Credit Union, were actually attacked by insiders. So you have now bank or credit union employees who are now using their access, who are exploiting the fact that they have privileged access into data stores, into infrastructure where customers' data is stored. They're leveraging that in order to grab the data, send it outwards, send it to threat actors, which would then be used obviously by threat actors. And I'm assuming that in that case, these employees were somehow financially benefited from that situation. So the risk that we all take is that most of our employees are good or loyal. Some of them might go rogue. And trusting an employee simply because they are an employee is not really a good idea. So what controls can we put in place in order to prevent such a situation? Last but not least, Truist Bank. This is the third attack vector I mentioned. Even if you are a significant, large financial institution or any company for the sake of the matter, you still have potentially tens, if not hundreds, of suppliers and contractors, third parties that you work with, which your business relies on. In many cases, these third parties are much smaller, which means they have less budget, less personnel, less expertise to deal with cyber threats, which means that every one of these third parties is a potential attack surface and an entry point from which an attack can come in or from which data can be exfiltrated. In the case of Truist Bank, one of their contractor, which is a debt collector called Financial Business and Consumer Solutions, was breached, and the Truist customer database, or part of it, was actually used through a breach of one of their third parties. So once again, we're looking here at all three types of attack vectors, and we're going to talk about how each of these can be prevented or mitigated, and what different technologies, how different technologies are used in order to help us prevent those. Now, what we don't want to do is we do not want to put in place 20 different tools which create more work for us. We want to put in place tools which automate the response and which actually make us work less, not because we want to work less, but mainly because if it is automated, it is quicker, and we then have less to clean up. So let's talk about why is all of this happening? Why are we hearing every Monday morning about yet another breach, or maybe in some cases, multiple breaches on that same day? And I think what we're seeing in the market is driven by four significant factors. The first one, I know this is obvious, everyone talks about this, AI is out there, and yeah, you can, in some cases, over-exaggerate, but in this case, I think over-exaggerating still doesn't explain enough how much AI has impacted the cyberspace. There are significantly improved attack vectors through highly sophisticated phishing attacks, which are now crafted to make sense to you personally in some case, using AI to create very, very targeted email messages, in some cases messages through collaboration tools, which are asking you to do something. Now, the fact that this is crafted and created by AI just makes it more likely for anyone to fall for the scam and to click on that link, which is how an attack begins. A second trend, which is kind of shaping where we are today, is the fact that we're using more and more and more third parties for different services. Some of these services are SaaS services, business applications that we use, or other tools. But many of these services are business operation services, like, for example, the debt collection third party that we just talked about in the breach a moment ago. There are many business functions that are outsourced to third parties. And once again, in many cases, these third parties do not have the same level of security that we have deployed within our own organization, which makes basically our attack surface look like Swiss cheese, because it's all poked with tens of different holes through which an attack can come in and through which our data can be exfiltrated. It is said that 29% of all breaches have third-party involvement, so an attack coming in through a third-party interface. Third, we're overwhelmed with an enormous amount of regulation. Everyone in the financial space has seen the changes in PCI DSS 4.0 and now lately 4.0.1. And if you're a credit union, you've seen the very strong push in the last year or so, driven by the Credit Union Association to enforce PCI DSS implementation within credit unions. That is a significant and very blessed shift. That is a very good thing. It will protect millions over millions of consumers, but it poses a challenge. It requires now more and more security to be put in place for cybersecurity reasons, for data security reasons, for network security reasons. All of these technologies need to be put in place, and that is definitely challenging. The same thing is happening now with HIPAA. If you're tracking what's happening in the healthcare world, the new security rule is now being enforced with a lot of new controls, and obviously with controls also enforcement and fines. So a lot is going on in the regulation space, in the compliance space, and it presents a challenge. So let's talk about how we solve that challenge. But what I really like to point out, and I know we keep hearing this in every presentation, but this, again, cannot be over-exaggerated. The data explosion, the unbelievable Cambrian explosion of data. Every 2 years, we look back and we realize that in the past 2 years, 90% of the data has been created only lately, only in the last 2 years. Think about what that means, that every 2 years, 90% of the latest data was just created right now. We are exponentially growing the amount of data we have, which means that we not only have now more data in storage, more importantly, all of that data is now traveling in unpredictable paths through email and collaboration tools, your Teams or Slack, or uploaded into storage, or shared over third-party facing portals, or uploaded into data lakes and then used through APIs by different applications, or more importantly, even used by AI or large language models. So that data just means that more data is present both at rest and in motion. And data in motion is usually unpredictable because humans move it from place to place, as well as machines. But it just means that we now need to think about the problem slightly differently about how we're planning on solving it. So with all of this information, with that explosion of data and AI and sophistication of attacks, what do we do? How do we go about now solving this in a new and modern way? In order to talk about what options we have, I'd like to use 3 technologies as a starting point. I'll be using DLP, data loss prevention, DSPM, data security posture management, and a new acronym called DDR. I know we all love acronyms, so DDR stands for Data Detection and Response. And I'm going to walk us through the differences between these technologies while talking about how they help more or less solve these 3 attack vectors: malware, ransomware, insider threat, and third-party risk. So let's start with the sophisticated threat actors, those that try to deploy malware and ransomware, which will then harvest credentials or exfiltrate data or gain access to unauthorized locations. What is data loss prevention? Data loss prevention is a tool that's been around for many, many years. The legacy version of that is deployed on the endpoint as an endpoint agent and is basically looking for for data that really shouldn't be shared externally. And when an action is identified where that data is trying to be shared through maybe the browser or through email, the activity is stopped by basically blocking the data transfer completely. That represents a few different problems. The first one is that data loss prevention focused on the endpoint itself is okay for protecting the endpoint, but in this modern world where we're using so much SaaS and so many different web applications where data is moving from cloud to cloud, from application to application, most of the data no longer is downloaded onto the endpoint or the laptop before being uploaded back into the cloud. So that point of presence doesn't really prevent the data exfiltration in all of the different options where data moves. And realistically, what data loss prevention was really focused on, or many of the legacy tools, they were focused on a continuous tuning of regex-based labels where you need to search for a given string of words or characters, and only if you find it, it is blocked, and false positives, and we know all of everything that happens with that type of deployment. But I'd say that specifically preventing threat actors, DLP is very limited in the ability to prevent the problem in the first place. So where you really want to block that malware or ransomware is when it comes in, and not let it in the door and then try to prevent its malicious actions afterward by blocking the content when it's already trying to leave the company. So DLP is a great tool. It has its own role within cybersecurity. It is limited in the ability to prevent threat actors in the first place. Data security posture management. Awesome tool, has been evolving in the last 3 to 5 years, mainly as a visibility tool, which looks at data where it is stored, mainly in data stores, in cloud storage, and tries to identify either data misuse or misconfigurations. Who has too much privilege to that data? And by looking at those configurations, suggesting changes that would reduce the attack surface. In some cases, even automating some of those access privileges. So once again, we're providing here a tool which is awesome. It's a visibility tool that shows us where the problems lie. It doesn't really prevent threat actors in the first place from deploying that malware ransomware before it can actually take action. Data detection and response, that third option, is actually intentionally trying to solve for those deficiencies in DLP and DSPM. What data detection and response claims to do, and at Votiro, we have been building data detection and response capabilities for the past 12 years. Data detection and response attempts to prevent the problem from happening in the first place, so there is no mess to clean up. I know that makes a lot of sense. Let's look at how we do that in a moment. So data detection and response, or the portion of data detection and response that deals with this specific attack vector, is called content disarm and reconstruction, CDR. What that means is that 80% of the data that moves throughout an organization, which is unstructured data, files that move through email, collaboration tools, browser uploads and downloads, third-party portals, all of that data would be inspected, would be made safe, both from known threats and, more importantly, from unknown threats. And the content itself would be made safe in two ways. The first one is zero-day attacks are left behind. which means we've prevented that malware or ransomware or zero-day attack from coming in. But the second thing, which sometimes is overlooked and is really important to recognize, is content disarm and reconstruction always allows the data through, but safely, which means that nothing is being blocked, which means that employees can actually do their job without the content being denied from them, and then they need to go beg IT and the SOC to release their content from quarantine or release it from a blocked antivirus. So the data that is released is safe, it's fully usable, and everyone can do their job. Let's move on quickly and talk about the same exact dilemma, but in the context of insider risk. So if your company, if you're a bank, if you're a credit union, and you are, you're running an insider risk program because you're aware of obviously the risk of employees using that sensitive data, a lot of sensitive data that a bank has. How do you go about preventing that? So if we think back into what we've talked about a moment ago, data loss prevention. The way that data loss prevention DLP tools would be going about this problem would be monitoring specific employee activity, employee action. Is this employee trying to overshare data that shouldn't be shared externally through email or through maybe uploads into their personal Dropbox or other environments? That is one way to go about solving the problem. The challenge with that is, first and foremost, DLP, because of how it is designed, has a lot of false positives. And if you're a company that has deployed DLP, or if you talk to companies that have deployed at least legacy DLPs, what you learn quickly is that because of the many false positives, many companies end up using DLP as a visibility tool, turning off the enforcement piece, which is the blocking piece. By doing that, you're actually removing the ability to block malicious activity. It becomes an inefficient tool, which requires significant handholding within the IT. Now, please don't misunderstand me. DLP still has a very important role in protecting the endpoint and protecting data exfiltration from the laptop itself and from servers as well. But the ability of DLP to prevent the oversharing of data, the malicious overshare, intentional malicious oversharing of data in the cloud and SaaS applications is extremely limited. When we think about data security posture management in the same exact context, what data security posture management does is it can show you which users are oversharing data and do they have the permissions to do that. But there's very limited capability to look at user behavior, and there's really no automated remediation for the data itself. So there are some automated remediations for who has access to different folders and who can access different data. But in many cases, what you will find is that different types of users need access to the data, but they're not allowed to share it through different types of mediums with other users. And that is kind of where DSPM ends with its capabilities. Once again, this is where data detection and response comes in for the save and says, you know what? Yes, we're concerned about what users can do. We are more concerned, even more concerned, about what data can do. Because if an employee shares data with someone which is legitimately receiving the data, that is one thing. But if an employee is sharing the data to an environment or to someone who is not allowed to see the data, what we really want to do is to limit what that data can do in different environments by obfuscating it in these specific scenarios. So data detection and response, in Votiro's case, employs a technique called data masking. Think about a world where when you are sharing a file over email or uploading it into your Dropbox, in some cases, the file with the data would be transmitted and shared fully visible, but in other cases, based on context, based on who the user is, based on the recipient, based on the medium, parts of that data, the crown jewels, will be masked. Suddenly, a lot of the data security problems disappear and go away. Because if the sensitive data is masked, there's no cleanup that is needed, even if there was an intentional malicious attempt to share the data externally. So we keep the data safe proactively, and no cleanup is needed. Moving on to the third and last scenario, third-party risk. I have been talking to tens, if not hundreds, of CISOs and CIOs in the past couple of years about this specific program, which is keeping everyone awake at night. We're all aware of the risks of leveraging third parties, specifically because we know that when we leverage third parties, we have very limited control on what they actually can do with our data. And actually, the cybersecurity techniques that they have put in place in order to protect our own data and our customers' data. So let's look at what these three different technologies can do. Data loss prevention puts in place restrictions and enforces some limitations on what data can be shared if you actually turned on blocking and enforcement. However, remember the limitations we talked about earlier. If you are now limiting data sharing by blocking it, and there are many false positives, you will be blocking a whole lot of content that is needed by that third party. So instead of allowing the data that is allowed while blocking the crown jewels, you're now blocking significant amounts of content, which again introduce friction and require more IT, more SOC operations, more manual intervention in order to remediate and let the business flow. So DLP is fairly limited in what it can do. It prevents, it does introduce a harsh control, which is a good starting point. But then as you want to start introducing more automation and less friction, it has its limitations. Data security posture management can help identify who has access to sensitive data. But once again, in many cases, preventing data misuse is a problem, because a user might have access to a data because they're allowed to see it and use it, but they might not be allowed to share it. So in that case, how do you prevent the oversharing across that multitude of environments? Once again, DSPM is not really designed to do that. Data detection and response, once again, is designed to do exactly that. The whole point, the entire point of this new category called data detection and response is basically to say, we recognize that many users are allowed access to data because they need that data for their daily job, to perform their daily roles. What they can then do with that data, once the data is in motion, well, that's a whole different question. So we really need to put in place controls for where that data flows. And we'll talk about that in a few seconds. Primary takeaways. What I'd really like to kind of have you all keep in mind when leaving this session, after we talk a little bit about how Votiro can help you, is that traditionally, we've been thinking about the problem, the data security problem, mainly in the context of structured data. We have a lot of structured data in databases, so let's make sure it's safe. While that is a good and important problem to solve, structured data is only 20% of the data that any organization has. Actually, 80% of the data is unstructured, which means that that data that is secured within a database is then shared through files across many different environments, applications, and networks. And to make it worse, structured data is mainly used within this confined environment of a database and then pulled into applications. Unstructured data is very unpredictable because it's us humans using and sharing it. And what we do with that data is very unpredictable. So when you ask yourself, if I'm wanting to prevent malware ransomware-based attacks, if I want to reinforce my insider risk program, or if I want to to beef up my third-party risk program, think about unstructured data, think about where it lives and where it is shared, start there, and from there, let's figure out what the tools are that can help you prevent data exfiltration. The second piece, and this is where I really want to go back to the technologies we talked about. There's no single solution out there that does everything. I know I've talked a lot about what DDR, data detection and response, can do. It's not a silver bullet, right? There still is a significant need for tools to work in tandem. DLP to put enforcement in place on the endpoint itself. DSPM will give you visibility, great visibility, into what is stored in data stores, who has access to those data stores. But then really when you want to put in place that actual prevention, that preventative motion, which includes automated enforcement, that's where DDR comes in. So all of these tools, combined with others such as endpoint detection and response, EDR, all work together to protect your data. Last but not least, the claim to fame of data detection and response is trying to solve a problem in a different way than what legacy tools have been doing. Legacy tools have been solving the problem in a reactive way. Let the problem happen, let the malware land on your endpoint, then clean up the mess. Let the ransomware come in. Once it tries to exfiltrate the data, let's block it at the door. Instead of that, data detection and response attempts to prevent the problem in the first place, so the malware and ransomware doesn't come in, so the data is kept stored safely, so it is masked. So if it is masked, even if it is shared, there's no risk in it being shared. So let me tell you a little bit about Votiro. Votiro has started its journey 12 to 13 years ago, mainly focused on preventing malware proactively with content disarm and reconstruction. And what we've realized throughout the past few years is that the unstructured data problem is becoming so significant that companies now are not able to shy away or assume or neglect that problem and assume that it will just go away, because unstructured data now is significant. Once again, it's 80% of the data we have. It keeps moving. It's always on the go. Yes, we have a lot of data at rest, but we are more concerned about what happens to data when it's in motion, when it is uploaded into your Box or Dropbox account, when it is sent over Teams, when it's Slack to someone, when it's downloaded or uploaded through your RBI session, through the browser, shared in SaaS applications. And because of that, Votiro focused a lot on integrating with this vast ecosystem to ensure that let's solve the 80% problem, where most of your data moves. Let's make sure that those areas are safe, where unstructured data can be shared safely and in a compliant manner. Here's how we do it. This is the secret sauce. This is how the sausage is made. So at Votiro, we are basically file experts. When I say file experts, what I really mean to say is that we take the problem at the source, which is the data itself. We look at the content itself, at unstructured data, and we are capable of cracking open files, over 200 file types. And once we crack them open, we know what should be there and what should not have been there in the first place. By doing that, that allows us to leave behind things that are intentionally malicious, but are both known to the community as malicious, and also we can remove things that are unknown. So when you think about the antivirus or sandbox communities who really focus on finding things that have a known signature or finding things that have a known behavior, with content disarm and reconstruction, you do not need to know whether this is malicious or not. You just know that it shouldn't have been there in the first place. So by knowing that, we leave these things behind and we make the file as close as possible to 100% safe. While that file is open right in front of us, we can also, using artificial intelligence techniques, which have been developed over the years and trained over millions of data sources, to detect, with no use at all of regular expressions, none of those false positives, all of that pain goes away. We detect with artificial intelligence private data, PII, PHI, PCI, specifically for the financial institutions. We can detect those and we can mask them in motion. What that entire solution set gives you is the ability to both prevent malware from coming in within the unstructured data, within the files, and it also keeps the data safe while it's in motion. So all of that masking magic happens as the data is moving and flowing throughout the organization, based on the context and based on the users that are exposed to that data, which basically means that you're preventing malware attacks, you're preventing oversharing of data, you're preventing insider risk, and you're keeping your third-party interfaces safe from data exfiltration. If you want to learn more, we are definitely here to take the call, and I'd be more than happy to walk you through how data detection and response can help your organization. We usually start with a quick discovery session to really help you realize and find where that unstructured data is presenting the highest degree of risk for your specific organization. And with that, Tom, I'll bring it back to you.
Excellent job, sir. Thank you so much. I've got a couple of quick questions for you. We're almost out of time. You had mentioned on one of the slides, it mentions sophisticated attackers. Can you kind of tell us a little bit, who are these folks? I mean, I imagine everybody and their brother wants money out of the financial services folks, but I mean, is there a particular group that is like more savvy than the rest that we should be more worried about?
Yeah, that's actually an excellent question and very timely, because if you'd asked me that same question 2 years ago, my answer would be completely different. My answer would be, yes, there are many hacker groups out there, but it's really the nation state actors, those that have the significant funds and and can be funding very serious operations, very sophisticated and very talented hackers that wreak havoc, and both for, I'd say, financial reasons, but also for national security reasons, would be hacking into our large financial institutions. The challenge and what has changed is that AI, large language models, have completely changed that space. Now every high school kid can use AI to create a piece of code that would be sophisticated enough to initiate a breach. And even more than that, using LLMs in order to create the means of initiating that breach using phishing-based attacks became so much. So it's no longer a weird text that you can recognize as bad language and you can avoid clicking on it. Now it looks real, and it's aimed at you personally. That's how good it is and how efficient AI-based attacks are today.
One last question for you, more of an opinion, I guess, than anything else. But of the two major ones that you kind of talked about, insider threat and third party, which would you consider maybe more damaging, or which one is, like, in your mind, like, this is the one we really got to focus on?
Okay, so it's a great question, and the answer is that it really depends. It depends on the specific organization and their exposure to these different types of risks. So if you're a very small credit union, right, you might have hundreds or thousands of customers, but you probably have 10 employees or 20 employees or maybe 100, most of which you know very closely. The risk there might be lower. You probably are relying on a lot of third parties, so that's where I would put my focus. When you talk about the larger organizations, it might be different, right? You may have 50,000 or maybe hundreds of thousands. I've worked with banks who have hundreds of thousands of employees. In that situation, the ability of an internal employee to grab a significant amount of data and deploy it externally would be extremely risky. So I think it's more a question of prioritization for each organization. So no single silver bullet answer, but yep. I would say this, I would evaluate in your specific attack surface, which one is more likely to happen, and start there. And the good
Honestly,
news
that's a
is
fair answer. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, that
Yeah.
I was going to give you some grief and be like spoken like a true cyber attorney, but but no, honestly, that does make a lot of sense.
I'll say this. I think the good news is that there are technologies out there that can easily deal with both at the same time.
That's good. That's good. I wanted to at least hear that. we gotta at least give them a silver lining, right? So if there's no silver bullet. So thank you so much, Eric. Any final thought as we wrap up your session? If nothing else, what should our audience have taken away from this?
If I'd have to leave us with one thought. So tomorrow morning when you wake up and you grab your cup of coffee or tea, ask yourself, what are my users, my employees doing right now? Or what could they be doing which I'm not aware of? For example, are they using AI and sharing private data with AI to do their job, but are they doing it in an unsupervised manner? Do they have access to Teams or Slack and they might be sharing information which they shouldn't? The moment you start going down that rabbit hole and thinking about that, you will very quickly realize at least 5 to 10 scenarios which should be going, okay, that probably should be dealt with. That is probably an area where we need to put some controls on. Once you've went through that mental exercise, give us a call. We'll be happy to, to brainstorm with you and, help you think through that problem.
Awesome. Awesome. That's the end of our time with Mr. Eric Avigdor. Thank you, sir, for being here. If you have additional questions, want more information, you've got their email there, info@votiro.com. Hit them up. I mean, they want to help you. They'll do it. So please check it out. Also, pop over to the Resource Center. There's more educational content over there that you can check out and see what can help you as well. So that concludes our time. We've got up next is a quick conference break, and then you've got more sessions to choose from. So we'll see everybody at the next round of sessions.